All right, my English teacher friend. So I got a really cool one for you up my sleeve today. So I took a look at Nick Hornby's Thunder Road, and it's a great passage in which he talks about the impact, like the indelible imprint that Bruce Springsteen's song Thunder Road has had on his life, and is kind of the backdrop or the soundtrack to so many events that, even during his formative years into his adult years have shaped his identity. And so it's really rife for a nice rhetorical analysis. But if you don't want to go that route, or if you want to kill two birds with one stone, you can also do a personal narrative song reflection with your students, which I'll model at the tail end of this video. So this video is going to do a couple of things. I'm going to Bob Ross my instruction and show you how to do a rhetorical analysis of Thunder Road. So I'll paint a number of intros and body paragraphs with you. And then at the tail end of the video, I'll model how to do the personal narrative song reflection. So I'm a child of the 90s. I graduated high school in 1994. And a band that I've loved ever since the early 90s is Toad the Wet Sprocket. I'm giving you like a little teaser here. And Toad the Wet Sprocket has provided a soundtrack for many of the key moments in my life. So I chose the song Something's Always Wrong by Toad the Wet Sprocket, and I'll model how I did my personal narrative on that, a la Nick Hornby. I just kind of made a quasi template or roadmap from Thunder Road and followed his lead. So I'll begin with rhetorical analysis, and I will end with personal narrative, and I'll put timestamps in the video to indicate where we begin and end those segments. So as always, my little caveat is this: you got to Bob Ross your instruction. You're going to see some samples that my AP language students wrote for this piece, and the writing is exceptionally good. And I think a lot of teachers say, geez, man, my kids can't get anywhere near that. That's insane. How do you do that? And a lot of it is because I run them through my Word Study Academy, my Nuance Academy, and it's skill and drill from September all the way till exam time. And it's just, I run these little academies that focus on those fine skills of the voice, the rhythm, the flow, that elusive unicorn sophistication point. Like I really teach it explicitly. And I get to my easel and canvas, just like Bob Ross, and I paint with my students, air quote paint. So I'm always like, all right, this is how you do the intro. There's two templates. You can declare or invert. Here's how you do the body paragraphs syllogistically, right? And just go through the expository modes that way until I have a classroom of independent writers. So when I work with teachers through the National Writing Project, or when I'm peddling my own PD across the nation, I always say, position yourself as the expert writer in the classroom. It makes all the difference. And I know some teachers get really leery about that. They don't like showing their work to their students, but it makes a world of difference. It really demystifies the writing process for kids, and you'll have a classroom of writers that just flourish and take off if you do it. So our first question is this, the begging question. So how do I write the introductory paragraph? Well, for those that are familiar with my work, you know that we're doing rhetorical analysis of Thunder Road. So we are going to declare the thesis. For rhetorical analysis, you always want to declare. Literary analysis, you always want to invert. And if you want to unpack that a little bit, just dig through my YouTube channel or go on my webpage and take a look at some of my other writing workshops specifically for rhetorical analysis and literary analysis, and you can spot the differences in the introductory paragraph. But for time's sake, expediency's sake, I'm going to focus on the declarative for this. Now, here's the kicker, right? This is like a little cheat or a hack of the exam, of the AP language exam. Implicit in the rhetorical analysis passage are two questions. What is the authorial intent, and how does the author construct meaning? My utmost guarantee to you is this, and you can promise your students this. If they accurately ascertain the meaning of the text, meaning they read the text correctly, because texts have right answers, you do have to interpret it within a certain lens. precision. So if they ascertain the correct meaning and answer these two questions, out of the gate, they're guaranteeing themselves the thesis point. So what is the authorial intent and how does the author construct meaning? So in my classroom, I have a little laminate poster that looks like this. And every time we encounter a new rhetorical term, device, technique, we throw that on our board with some Velcro. And at the time of this particular passage, this is what my students they've had exposure to so far. And there's nothing really new in this piece as rhetorically that my students have not seen. So it was in their wheelhouse. It's in their comfort level. We've been doing rhetorical analysis for a few months now. So let's focus on the declarative. When you declare, you begin with your thesis, hence the name declare. You declare, you announce, you yell your thesis. And going back to our previous slide here, the thesis answers the question, how does the author construct meaning? So in rhetorical analysis, you're going to focus on meaning making first and foremost. So you're going to declare the thesis. Here's a tip, here's a strategy I give my students. As we know in my templates, whether it be declarative or inverted, each introductory paragraph is going to be 4 sentences long. I call this the 3+1. So students are going to take 3 sentences to focus on the construction of meaning and 1 sentence authorial intent. And therefore, it's just a quintessential classic declarative thesis. So my students typically will focus on the 3 most salient terms that are germane and really construct the meaning of the piece. And I want them to avoid doing rhetorical terms dumping grounds, right? Just make a litany of terms, devices, techniques. But over 3 sentences, spell out how the author constructs meaning, and then 1 sentence of authorial intent. Now, this is an interesting piece because probably the most significant term is its thematic principles, right? So Thunder Road has a heavy theme-based message in it. So typically you see that in literary analysis and not so much with rhetorical analysis. So that's the one little zinger that my students weren't comfortable with. It was a little foreign to us to have something so thematically driven. So that's just one little caveat I'll put out there as you do a Socratic seminar and unpack this text with your students prior to writing about it. So this is what my students are going to do. 3, construction of meaning, 1, authorial intent. Now, it's an academic paper, so we definitely need to have some tier 2 level vocabulary in there, and that's all just stuff from my Word Study Academy. Tier 2, I mean your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. Sentence constructs comes from my Nuance Academy. We really put our arms around rule number 18 that comes from Strunk and White in their seminal book called Write It Right. They say in rule number 18 that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So as my students are trying to manipulate their syntax for the effects of achieving voice, rhythm, flow, get the unicorn point of sophistication, you're going to see them do some ganders on their sentence constructs to avoid, what emerging and struggling writers do in terms of just stacking independent clause, short, simple declarative sentence, short, simple declarative sentence. Like, young writers do that over and over and over again. At AP level, we don't want that. And as I already alluded to, exactly 4 sentences long. Inverted, I'll skip this for now because it's the domain of literary analysis. And then for the other expository modes, again, look at the videos. For argument, persuasion, synthesis, and research, it's a 50-50 coin flip between declarative and inverted thesis. It's really contingent upon the prompt and the direction the argument is going. And I model that exclusively in the other videos. So let's take a look at a few. Again, we're going to go 3+1. This student started with a heavy focus on the theme. As I was Bob Rossing it myself, I was like, geez, it's really kind of impossible not to talk about theme, which I guess in rhetorical terms, you could address it as the logos, but we kind of hunkered in around thematic ideas, the exigence of the piece. So look where this student went. Oscillating between self-deprecating humor and sheer and utter sincerity, Hornby delineates the power of music's transformative presence. So you kind of got a little bit hint of the tone and the ethos in that first line here. So the self-deprecation and then the sincerity is part of his ethos, but also part of the tone. And then thematically, you're focusing on music's transformative power. So you get that all in the first sentence: exigence, authorial intent. Just as the formative teen years are amorphous and tough to pin down, so's the song's indelible means to etch the narratives of our lives. At times meandering and discursive, right? So you're getting into the logos here. My guys imply the terms, right? So Hornby really is all over the place in how he delineates this narrative. It meanders, it's discursive. There's not like a clear delineation of point A, point B, point C. Kind of circles all around, very spiral in nature. So at times meandering and discursive, Hornby progresses from beginning lightheartedly to delving into the awesome impact a single song can have on the formation of a single self. Throwing his punchlines and self-effacing humor between parentheses, so that's a syntactical feature, Hornby walks a fine line of being deadpan serious in spite of the abundant arbitrariness of the phenomena. So again, you focus on three things that construct the meaning, but also get to the authorial intent, the exigence or the aha of the piece. So it's always 3+1. Note the vocab, it's elevated without sounding goonish, right? The kid doesn't sound contrived or pretentious. It's probably, I think rhetorical analysis is probably the most academic expository mode. So I invite my kids to geek it out a little bit on this, but always, always, always stay in your wheelhouse. Don't use words that don't belong to you. Don't make up words. If you don't possess the word fully, do not use it. And I tell my guys they have to sound natural. If they wouldn't use the word in natural everyday discourse, not to use it in their papers. The idea is that using $1 million words is not the equivalent of good writing. You have to own those words. And then the sentence constructs are also very advanced in this. So out of the gate, I think any AP reader would say, yeah, if this kid can sustain this for the duration of the paper, I'm going to give this kid the sophistication point. This is really, really good. And it's all housed in that declarative template. Here's student number 2, going to do the exact same thing, 3+1. The influences that give shape to a life are at times rather arbitrary and tough to pin down and give name to. So a thematic lead. Hornby, in an alinear manner, traces the indelible imprint one song has had on his life over a 25-year time frame. At times humorous, at other times deadly serious, he weaves together a narrative that attempts to logically deduce the arbitrary nature of music's influence on identity shaping. Incorporating a number of syntactical strategies, Hornby tries to give voice to the exact reasons why one song has moved him for so many years like an unmovable force. So again, my students typically do not explicitly state their terms. They did with syntax. It's kind of hard to get around syntax, and approach it implicitly. But you can see that they have definitely isolated the 3 most important terms of the piece. And then they have the authorial intent in here as well. So 3+1. Every single time you can do this, vocab up, focus on those sentence constructs. Student number 3 is going to use the exact same template and have the same results. Music, for whatever the reasons, has an ineffable capability of helping one form and shape their identity over time, right? That's the exigence of the piece. Vacillating between self-effacing humor and sincere pathos, Hornby carefully enumerates how a single song has impacted his life like no other force or being. Juxtaposing Thunder Road to a litany of other classic hits, he gives voice to the arbitrary nature of music's mysterious ability to arrange one's life course. Even the syntactical arrangements help Hornby walk this fine line of confessing something that is on one hand laughable and on the other deeply human and personal. So this student number 3, is much more explicit with dropping and identifying their terms, devices, techniques. So like they say enumerate, they say juxtapose. and syntax, right? And then the rest are implied. So nonetheless, it doesn't necessarily matter. I think it's more skillful to imply than to be so forthright, but sometimes students do better, just directly saying it and being very forthright in the expression of their thesis. So yet again, 3 plus 1, tier 2, sentence constructs. Every single time you do a rhetorical analysis, you can use the declarative thesis. And that's good news because then it really demystifies the writing process, which speeds students up. We know it's a rigorous timed exam, and it takes the guesswork out of the writing. When the students show up to the exam, they're not scratching their head saying, how do I write this? It just becomes rather intuitive, instinctual, habitual with practice, practice, practice. So the next question is this. We're done with the intro. We got some bodies to write. And what I'm going to do is model for you how to write the first body paragraph. One of the things that I always tell AP teachers is this. My students write 4 paragraphs, intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. So in this writing workshop, I'm just going to show you how to do the first body paragraph and then indicate how to transition into that second body paragraph. And conclusions, I find most teachers kind of have an idea of how to do that, so I'm not going to get into it for time's sake in this video. I have other videos where I go over conclusions for rhetorical analysis if you want to take a look, but otherwise I'd be going on for a very long time in this writing workshop. So as we know, all body paragraphs with my templates, regardless of the expository mode, can be written syllogistically. So that's rhetorical analysis, literary analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, even research can be written syllogistically. So if you're new to me, I'll give you a cursory overview of the syllogistic method. If you want to do a deep dive, again, get into the YouTube channel. I have lessons on inductive, deductive reasoning, and the history of the syllogism if you want to go that deep with your kids. But suffice to say for now, the syllogism comes from Aristotle. It's in the Aristotelian tradition. Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling. And they'd often throw out these pithy, juicy, essential questions like, what is justice? Which is at the core of Plato's Republic. And these great philosophical think tankers would step to the proverbial mic and they would drop their definition of what justice is. And Aristotle said, hey, the guys that really argue well, that are cogent and sustain line of reasoning, they actually argue syllogistically. It's like a mathematical computative equation. And he said they go premise, premise, conclusion. So I'll give you an example of one. Premise 1, if I were to say arsenic is deadly, followed by premise 2, my dog ate arsenic, you'd naturally conclude logically, my dog is going to die. So when our students write, we want them to be that cogent, that bulletproof, that lockstep. And unfortunately, and especially if you get looking at sample papers, most kids hunker into the second premise way too much, and that's why we have a break in expository mode. Students cease to write rhetorical analysis and they write plot analysis. They're just basically regurgitating the text and retelling the story of Thunder Road, or whatever it is they're analyzing or should be analyzing, but they're just summarizing it like a Cliff Note summation. And we don't want that. So how do we tweak that into a template for rhetorical analysis? Here it goes. First premise is going to be an argument containing the terms, devices, techniques. Here's the kicker with this. On FRQ1 for the AP Lang exam, the College Board states 3 times, your argument must be central. I wish they would say that on all 6 FRQs, Lit and Lang combined, because expository writing is an act of argumentation. Rhetorical analysis is an argument. So to keep the centrality of the argument, I want my students to take 3 sentences to spell out their terms, devices, techniques. Now, this is also key in the sense that if we want students to break that pattern of one paragraph tone, one paragraph diction, one paragraph syntax, etc., they have to learn how to multitask their terms, devices, techniques to interconnect them, to make them hold hands, to make them talk to each other. So in 3 sentences, they can do that. Versus a single topic sentence, they can't unless they rhetorical term dump, and we don't want that. So to give them 3 sentences ensures the centrality of their argument and that they have space to interconnect. 4th sentence begins the second premise, and this is the textual support, which is basically just a teeter-totter balance between the quoting and the paraphrasing. Students have the text in front of them, so they can feel free to quote and or paraphrase. Don't do one far more at the expense of the other. And then the conclusion of the body paragraph, the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph. Really want to emphasize that, not the conclusion of the essay, the conclusion of the body paragraph is the textual analysis. And this is where you throw your links back to the prompt, the thesis, you keep the promise of the first premise. And it sounds like a big echo. You basically come full circle in a syllogism. You end where you began. Smart students ask me this all the time. They say, Mr. Kuhn, your template for the introduction is 4 sentences long. How many sentences is an appropriate body paragraph? And it's an excellent question. I tell my students to shoot for 10 to 12 sentences. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that they often write and we see on the exam just don't have enough, going on in terms of support and analysis to really advance an argument. So I like, good pithy 10 to 12 sentence body paragraphs, every syllogistic body paragraph, no matter the expository mode. So take a look at my first 3 sentences here. This is what the first premise is going to look like. All right. So my students often steal this stem right from the onset, or they have something akin to it. So it's a training wheel, it's a scaffold, but it cues your reader into knowing that you're going to go chronologically, that you have a method to your madness here, that you're going to be organized and that your line of reasoning is going to stay intact. So students often ask, where do I begin? And I say, start right where Hornby starts and indicate that. So right from the onset, Hornby emulates how music etches itself to one's memories through anaphora. So you see, you're just going to drop your terms here. That's the first thing he does in the passage is the anaphora. And given the unpredictability of which songs hold this sway over oneself, he admits even if it's ludicrous that Thunder Road is the one anthem that provides the soundtrack for how his life has unrolled over the years. So he got a focus on the theme. So as not to take himself too seriously, so you're into the characterization here, which is ethos, or as a means to repel judgment, he couches this confession and admission with a bit of humor tone that is sandwiched as side commentary. So we're going to analyze all the parenthetical statements in here. So you got syntax. So you got a lot that you've multitasked in here. Now, here's the thing. Now, in order to pull this off and sustain the line of reasoning, you have to quote and or paraphrase the anaphora, quote and or paraphrase an analysis of the theme, the syntax, and the tone. So you need quotes and or paraphrases for all the things that you promised. And you don't have to go in a certain pecking order, but all of those things must have quotes and or paraphrases within the second premise. Let's see how this student does. And mind you, this is all one big body paragraph. It's just on separate slides for space purposes. I can't fit everything on one slide and have it be legible. So look at this. This is the second premise. So my students often transition back to that right from the onset with a transitional phrase like immediately. So we talked about anaphora first, so let's start there. Immediately, Hornby touches upon the indelible nature of music's impact and commences his narrative wistfully by stating repeatedly, I can remember listening to this song. All right, so that's the anaphora. So we quoted it, right? Go back here. We said it first, so we're going to quote and or paraphrase it first. That's an easy trick to ensure the line of reasoning stays intact. You quote, you got to analyze. Some songs, sometimes even in spite of the lyrics' meaning and thrust, hold one beneath its thumb and outlines the narrative of a life. Even though Springsteen is tagged with adjectives like bombastic, histrionic, macho, and jingoistic, this singular song has led Hornby over the years to reflect that there's something else going on within his identity construction through the process of hitting replay thousands and thousands of times. So now we're into the theme, right? That quote aligns with the theme, but also the ethos a little bit. Admitting that something as trivial as this corny song encapsulates his life so perfectly is no small task. So Hornsby saves face by manipulating a series of syntactical strategies. Why are we talking about syntax? Because you promised it down here. So we got to quote and or paraphrase some of that. So check this out here. Where did I leave off? Hornsby saves face by manipulating a series of syntactical strategies. First, to poke fun at himself, he speaks to the side of his seriousness with several parenthetical statements. So that's hard to quote, so you can just paraphrase that. In light of what this particular song topically addresses, one might expect a teen version of Hornby driving down any turnpike or highway or freeway with the wind blowing through his hair, blaring this tune in a sleek convertible. So one of the things you're also noticing here is this teeter-totter balance between the quoting and the paraphrasing, and the quote transitions are pretty silky smooth. So go back to this last quote. I do a template within the template. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote relatively bite-sized, bracket as needed, it should sound conversational, right? You don't want abrupt quote transitions. That's going to preclude you from getting the sophistication point. Quotes need to be silky smooth, and that's just a cheat. It's a hack. 5-word rule. Quote, analyze. But without such a set of but no, Hornby notes the incongruity by noting that he's without hair and without such a set of wheels. He was just a teen coming to terms with an odd sort of transference, right? So all these quotes, these small quotes, are getting to the main thematic principle, the exigence of the piece. The reasons don't add up as to why certain books and films and pictures express who we are perfectly. But clearly there's something else going on, something mysterious and magical when such a song holds a firm grip on how an identity takes shape. All right. So we're going to continue into the conclusion here, but let's go back. Did we keep the promise of the first premise? Did we have a discussion of the anaphora, the theme, the ethos, and the syntax? Yep. We got quotes and paraphrases for all of that. So that's one way to really ensure that you keep your line of reasoning intact. Is bulletproof. So the conclusion of the body paragraph just takes a couple of sentences, go back to the thesis, go back to the prompt. For Hornby, the paradoxes paradoxically make all the sense in the world. A mere senseless song makes all the sense in the world as to the power it holds, right? So just wrap it up, put a little bow on it at the end. So what do we do next? What do we do next? Because I said earlier that we're going to do 4 paragraphs, intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. Simple answer. You're going to bust out another syllogism. You're only at the middle way of the passage. You still have so much to analyze. So go gather up the terms and devices that still need to be analyzed. Get some quotes and or paraphrases for those particular terms, devices. 3 sentences first premise, embed those quotes. Don't do quoting and paraphrasing one more at the expense of the other, and rock and roll 10 to 12 sentences, and you have it. And you will be at the conclusion paragraph. And again, if you want to see how to do conclusions, just go check out some of my videos on conclusions. So this takes us to the personal narrative portion of this lesson plan. So many of you are familiar with my work, and you know at the AP level, I do a lot of voice lessons with my students. We've cobbled together the AP Dream Team Voice Masters, and there's a certain voice that I want my students to cop when they write. And Hornby has it. Like Hornby would get the sophistication point all day long if you were to write for Lit or Lang. So I want my students to kind of emulate his voice, that teeter-totter balance of the colloquial, the vernacular, the academic, that swagger that he has, that hipster quality is something that translates really nice in terms of getting that unicorn sophistication point. So here's my prompt. Using Hornsby's Thunder Road as a quasi-template and roadmap, choose that one song that means the most to you. Give voice to how it has provided the soundtrack to so many meaningful events in your life and shaped your memories. Incorporate some of the rhetorical strategies we've studied over the course of our time together. So I'm a pretty decent writer, and I've modeled this for the kids because I always Bob Ross my instruction. So we've been studying anaphora, parallel syntax, things of that nature in our rhetorical reads. So we've been studying it. So I'm going to try my hand at it in my writing. And I'm not going to show you my whole draft of this for time's sake. I'll just get the gears in motion. And you can take off with your kids. This is just enough teaser of a Bob Ross to give you a sense. So the song I chose was Toad the Wet Sprockets, Something's Always Wrong. So I'm a kid of the 90s, and Toad the Wet Sprocket continues to be one of my favorite bands of all time. So I began the exact same way that Hornby began. I basically stole his opening and created a stem around it. And students can do the exact same thing. Start with the remembrance. I can remember listening to this song and loving it in the summer of 1992. I can remember listening to this song in my dorm room at Simon's Rock College of Bard. My Gatsby wealthy roommate from Connecticut unpacking his suitcase while aligning his cassette tape collection in perfect stacks of increments of 5 on our shared desk. I was just a kid from Norwich, New York, a small bucolic town where many of my friends' parents made things like Norwich aspirin, Colgate toothpaste, and Tide laundry detergent at the P&G plant. A town where we chewed tobacco and tipped cows for poop and giggles. A town in which we'd roll kegs of beer up the steep quarry walls and light bonfires in caves and party beneath the aurora borealis. So I'm just trying my hand at some of the rhetorical strategies that we've studied. I think if a kid can execute it, then they can identify it. So it's really good practice, right? Few birds, couple stones here. The youngest of 7 kids, the son of a truck driver, I did not understand Brian's allusions to Monty Python, nor had I ever listened to Toad the Wet Sprocket. My tie-dye t-shirt was thrift, his Ralph Lauren, some upscale mall in New Haven. As his pine-scented incense mixed with the cigarette smoke that was forbidden in our living quarters, my roommate explained, "Dude, there's no freaking way you've never heard of these guys. No way. You've never even listened to the Lemonheads, Crash Test Dummies, Gin Blossoms. Man, oh man, we got to get you up to speed." Something's Always Wrong is playing, and in comes Amy Knowles, the immediate jewel of my desire. She resembled Winnie from the Wonder Years, and I immediately fell into some strange Kevin Arnold pathos of low self-esteem and a bad case of not good enoughs. She's from Nashville. Her dad writes songs for the likes of Chet Atkins and Johnny Cash. Her grandfather wrote a separate piece. She knows all the words. And then I just continue from there. So for time's sake, I won't show you the whole thing. But that's a good enough example to get your kids started if you don't want to write your own example, or if you want to write one and show them mine so that they have double fodder to do it. By all means, go for it. So that is a writing workshop for rhetorical analysis and a personal narrative, Nick Hornby's Thunder Road. If you got questions, you can email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. To get slides and things of that nature, go to www.teachinghowtowrite.com. Also note that I am a lead teacher with the National Writing Project, and we offer a lot of teacher professional development. So if you're interested in taking a course with me or learning more about how NWP and I have teamed up, teachingHowToWrite.com. So hope all is well and that this serves you well. Happy teaching, happy writing.